They said no one would survive out there, not in a flood like this. Not a wild horse stranded on a sinking rooftop with nothing but storm clouds above and death rising below. But Ember did, because just as the water reached his chest and his legs began to fail, something appeared. Not a human, not a miracle. A dog, a retired rescue dog who had lost everything, except her instinct to save. And in that moment, their worlds collided. What followed wasn't just survival. It was something sacred. Red River Gorge, Kentucky, mid-April. The sky had gone from a smoky dusk to a wall of bruised gray in a matter of hours. Storms weren't new to these hills, but this one carried something darker, heavier. The scent of ozone hung thick above the treetops as wind barreled through the valleys like a warning no one could translate. Along the banks of the swollen Red River, a band of wild mustangs grazed in calm ignorance. Among them, Ember, 5 years old, dark red coat, with a lightning-shaped blaze down his nose, stood watch. He wasn't the largest, but he was the one others followed. Born beneath a thunderstorm and raised among sandstone ridges, Ember had never known fear as a companion. Until now, a sound ruptured the silence like a mountain cracking open. Not thunder, not wind. It was heavier, hungrier. Ember's ears flicked toward the east where the ridge dipped and the Mud Creek Dam stood or used to. The roar that followed was not of rain, but of destruction. Before he could whinny a warning, the ground itself seemed to tremble. A wall of brown fury exploded from the tree line, churning mud, broken logs, entire trees, an angry monster from the heart of the earth. The dam had failed. The herd scattered in primal panic. Ember turned sharply, searching for the youngest mare, Willa, barely a yearling. But the water was faster than thought. He saw her swept sideways, vanished under a surge of mud. Hooves pounded past him, screams, not whinnies. He ran. Muscles he'd never used this hard burned like fire. His hooves slipped on newly soaked clay, catching on jagged roots and stones. The rising water reached his knees, then his chest. Still he ran. Up ahead, through slanted rain and flying debris, a human structure appeared, a wooden cabin on low stilts. Ordinarily, Ember would have veered away. The scent of humans, of smoke and diesel, repelled him. But now it was the only thing above the flood. He surged toward the cabin as the wave caught his hind legs. His body rose, flung sideways mid-leap, and slammed against the barn wall with a sound like bones breaking. He kicked, flailed, and fought to breathe. The barn groaned, splintered, and collapsed around him. Darkness closed in. Then his body hit something solid. Slanted, slick, unmoving. A rooftop. Ember clawed with hooves and lungs to get above water, collapsing in gasps on the steep shingles. He had landed on the roof of the cabin. And it was still sinking. The floodwaters churned around him. Cars, refrigerators, broken fences, a child's rocking horse. Ember stood, chest-heaving legs, trembling from cold and shock. The rain fell sideways now, wind slicing like knives. The house groaned. Beneath him, the roof began to tilt. He shifted his weight, balancing awkwardly on the highest point, barely enough room for his 4 hooves. The sky above was a roiling cauldron, spitting lightning and rage. Below, the world had vanished. No land, no trees, no sound but the roar of water and wind. He whinnied once, long, low, hollow. No answer, nothing. The pain started in his hindquarters first. The strain of standing at an angle for so long was unnatural, but if he lay down, he would slide into the flood. So he remained, frozen, alone. A memory flickered his mother Dahlia, pale gray and wide-eyed, calling him back when he first dared stray too far as a foal. Her warmth, her breath against his cheek. A time before survival was the only story he knew. He shook his head, trying to banish it. But the wind answered with a scream. Night fell like a shutter being pulled. Ember's coat, once proud and shining, was now matted with mud and blood, his blaze barely visible through the grime. An owl, confused by the storm's timing, circled once and vanished. Ember didn't see it. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, or what remained of it. Every movement of the roof beneath him felt like a betrayal. Sometime after midnight, the water reached the edge of the roof. Soon it would lap at his hooves again. Ember lifted his head and screamed, not a call for help, but a defiant challenge to the storm itself. "You will not take me. Not tonight." The howl of the wind did not reply. As the sky bruised into early morning, a sliver of pink broke through the chaos. Ember blinked, surprised to find that he could still see color, that there was still color. A shape floated past. A cow. Lifeless. Ember looked away. Then came a suitcase, broken open, children's clothes spilling out like soft confessions. A family had lived here. This had been their world. Now it was his grave. But something in him refused to quit. There was no logic in it, no plan, just a raw, ancient refusal to surrender. Mustangs had survived centuries of drought, persecution, and loss. Ember was not ready to be the exception. And then, a shadow in the water. It moved unlike debris, with purpose. Ember stiffened, nostrils flared. Not a log, not a branch. It swam, his ears tilted forward, muscles tense, eyes locked. A dog, black and white, medium-sized, with intelligent eyes and the lean build of a working herder. It swam through the flood like it belonged there, each stroke deliberate. For a long moment, Ember did not breathe. The dog reached the base of the roof, scrambled with effort onto the shingles, shook off the water, and faced him. Her eyes said something Ember couldn't name. Not challenge. Not fear. Recognition. The dog stood on the roof like she belonged there, soaked to the bone, her chest rising with sharp breaths. But her eyes never left Ember's. She was medium-sized with a thick coat, mottled black-white and slate-gray, an Australian shepherd by the look of her. Her name, though Ember didn't know it yet, was Sadie. Sadie had once worked in search and rescue. She wasn't young anymore, her joints stiff in the morning, her face marked by a few silver hairs, but her heart still beat with the urgency of one who remembered what it was like to save lives. And something about the horse on the roof called her back to that instinct. She didn't bark. She didn't pace. She simply stared at Ember, as if willing him to see beyond the flood, beyond the fear, towards something he couldn't yet name. Then she turned, facing the distant shore, and gave a sharp, deliberate bark. Ember flinched. His legs had been locked in a painful stance for hours, and the sudden sound sliced through the hum of rain and rushing water. He watched her, his breath shallow. Her head turned back to him. Another bark, softer this time, aimed not at him but at the world beyond. He didn't understand, but something in her stillness calmed the wildfire racing through his veins. Then Sadie did something unexpected. She lay down, right there. On the slick, slanted shingles, water pooling around her chest. Her body curled slightly, and she rested her head on her front paws. Not a threat, not a command. Just presence. Ember didn't move. Couldn't. His instincts battled within him, run, strike, defend. But the weariness in his body and the warmth of her gesture met somewhere in his chest, where trust had been locked away. He let her stay. From a quarter-mile away, barely visible through the curtain of storm, a boat engine coughed to life. Sadie heard it first. Her ears twitched, then lifted. She rose, shook her fur, sending water flying, and barked again, a staccato series of calls aimed toward the sound. Through the rain, a shape emerged, a flat-bottomed rescue skiff, orange with emergency decals, pushing slowly against the current. two figures aboard. One of them, hands gripping the wheel, eyes scanning the water with fierce intensity, was Ruth Carmichael. Ruth was 64, broad-shouldered, with sun-leathered skin and gray hair she hadn't bothered brushing that morning. She'd once been a trauma nurse and had lived a life of second chances until tragedy gave her one of her own. Her daughter Ava had drowned in a flash flood 7 years ago. Ruth had given up nursing after that, retreating to a cabin in the gorge. She still kept her boat in working order. Habit. Reflex. But when the flood hit, she had pulled on her raincoat and headed out without waiting for permission. When Ruth saw the dog on the roof, something inside her clenched. "Sadie," she called over the roar. "Sadie, is that you?" The dog barked in response, then turned toward the horse. "Good Lord," Ruth whispered. "What have you found now?" Beside her sat Micah Tran, a young volunteer from Lexington, barely 22, his first time in a disaster zone. He was slight, wiry, and full of nervous energy, his cap pulled low to hide the worry in his eyes. "You want me to mark the GPS?" he asked. "Not yet," Ruth replied, slowing the engine. "She's pointing at that horse." Micah squinted. "On the roof, is that even real?" "Oh, it's real." Ruth's voice was hoarse. "And that dog didn't swim half a mile just to point at a hallucination." Sadie barked once more. Then with a flick of her tail, she leapt back into the water. Ember jerked as her body disappeared beneath the surface, then watched as she paddled toward the boat, powerful strokes despite the drag of exhaustion. Ruth reached down, caught her by the collar, and hauled her aboard. "Easy, girl," she murmured. "You did good." Sadie shook once, then looked back at the roof, eyes fixed on Ember. She whined softly, then leapt back into the flood. "What's she doing?" Micah asked. "Showing us the way," Ruth said, turning the boat. "And showing him it's safe." On the roof, Ember had watched all of this with tense, unblinking focus. The dog had left, returned, left again. But not once had she abandoned him, and something in his chest shifted. Not certainty, but maybe possibility. Sadie returned to the roof, clambered up with difficulty, and stood beside him. She pressed her body lightly against his trembling leg. Ember tensed, but her warmth, her weight, it grounded him. Another sound, this time a human voice, rose over the water. "We're coming," Ruth called. "Hold on, boy. We're almost there." Ember flicked his ears, but did not bolt. Sadie moved toward the edge, barking steadily now, guiding the boat through the maze of debris. From the shore, another observer stood on a ridge. Jim Beckett, Sadie's owner, a retired firefighter with a limp in his right leg and grief buried behind kind eyes. He had tried to keep Sadie inside when the flood hit. She broke through the screen door and vanished. But Jim knew her better than to be surprised. Sadie had never ignored a cry for help, not even a silent one. He watched her now from the high ground, binoculars tight in his calloused hands. When he saw the horse, his voice caught. "What are you doing out there, girl?" he whispered. "You really gonna bring that one home?" The water was colder than Ember had imagined. It hit his chest with a force that stole his breath and left only instinct. Legs that had stood trembling on a slanted roof for hours now kicked into motion, but the current immediately pushed him sideways. Panic surged. Behind him, Sadie leapt from the roof without hesitation. Her fur flattened tight against her lean frame, every stroke purposeful. She angled herself beside Ember, swimming close, but not too close, guiding, not crowding. Ember struggled to stay upright, each movement a battle against fatigue and fear. From the boat, Ruth Carmichael watched with clenched jaw and white knuckles on the rope. She had looped it loosely around Ember's neck, not to restrain, but to lead. It was a line of faith, not control. She called to him softly, her voice just barely carrying over the rush of water and engine. "Easy, boy. Follow her. You're almost free." Beside her, Micah Tran shifted his weight nervously. "He's not gonna make it, Ruth. He's too tired." "Don't say that," Ruth snapped, though not unkindly. He's got help. And he did. Sadie surged ahead, barking once as if to say, "Keep going." Ember's ears twitched. He followed. They passed the remains of a floating picnic table. Ember's leg struck something sharp metal, a submerged mailbox or maybe a torn piece of roof. Pain lanced up his foreleg and he faltered. Water rushed over his nose. He went under. Sadie spun mid-stroke and vanished beneath the surface. Seconds stretched like hours, then movement, a splash. Ember's head broke through again, sputtering, coughing eyes wide with animal terror. Sadie's teeth were clamped gently on the thick base of his mane, tugging just enough to lift to guide. On the boat, Ruth's hands shook. "Come on," she whispered. "Don't stop now." Micah reached down and grabbed the rope's tail, gently adding tension, not pulling, just steadying. "We've got you, buddy." Sadie stayed beside Ember, swimming at an angle so he could always see her. Each time he slowed, she barked. Each time debris floated near, she veered to block it or bark him away. A half-submerged pickup truck loomed ahead. Ruth steered wide. Ember didn't see it until Sadie shoved her body into his flank, pushing him left. His side scraped against the truck, but the worst was avoided. On a hilltop overlooking the river, Jim Beckett had arrived out of breath and mud-splattered. His leg brace squeaked with each step as he adjusted the binoculars. Sadie was in the water. He could barely make out the horse, but he saw the shape of her, the way she swam in circles around the animal. "Come on, girl," he muttered. "You've done harder things." Back in the flood, Ember's strength began to fade. His powerful legs now moved in frantic, shallow kicks. The pain in his chest burned with every breath. The current pulled harder near a bend in the river. Ruth veered the boat, fighting to stay close, and then hope. Micah stood up suddenly and pointed. "Overpass. It's still dry." Ahead, the Red Creek Highway Bridge stood like a fortress above the water, its base flooded, but its deck high and wide and packed with people. "Just a little farther," Ruth said, easing the motor. The rope around Ember's neck went taut. Not painfully, but firmly. He followed it. Sadie stayed with him, still barking, still guiding. Then his hooves brushed something solid. Not a log, not debris. Ground. Soft, but real. He stumbled, legs buckled, then caught. Ember was walking. The shallows were filled with broken things, bicycles, branches, metal scraps. Ruth made the call without hesitation. She turned off the engine, grabbed the rope, and jumped in. The water reached her waist. She gritted her teeth and moved backward, coaxing Ember forward. "That's it, boy. Come on. Sadie says you're a fighter. Prove her right." Ember slipped twice. Sadie pushed from behind, not aggressively, just enough to keep him moving. And then, like ghosts from floodwater dreams, they reached the concrete of the overpass. A crowd had gathered. Some had phones. Others just watched, silent, breathless. Ruth and Sadie climbed first. Ember collapsed on the pavement. He lay on his side, heaving. His coat was stained, his eyes hollow. Sadie dropped beside him, her body half-curled, wet fur touching his flank. She rested her head against him. No sound, no bark, just presence. For several seconds no one moved. Even the air seemed to wait. Then a murmur spread. A child whispered, "That dog saved a horse." A woman knelt beside her own dog, crying. Micah stood near the back of the boat, still shaking. "That wasn't supposed to work," he said, but it had. Near the bridge's edge, a new character approached, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead veterinarian with Kentucky Wildlife Response. She was in her late 40s with sharp green eyes and a calm voice that always carried authority. She crouched nearby, hands out, but not reaching. "That dog did more than save him," she murmured. "She's keeping him alive." Look at how he's breathing. Calmer, slower, like she's talking to him. Ruth, soaked and breathless, nodded. Sadie always knew how to find the ones who needed her most. Dr. Vasquez examined Ember's legs from a distance. We'll wait until he lifts his head. No needles, no ropes. Let them rest. Sadie lifted her head, looked at Ruth, then back to Ember. She seemed to understand the plan. Jim reached the bridge just in time to see Sadie curled against the horse. He didn't approach. Just sat on a crate nearby, arms resting on his knees, pride and disbelief warring in his expression. "That's my girl," he whispered. The sun rose over Red Creek Bridge like a promise, its soft gold slicing through the mist of the flood's aftermath. Ember lay on the cracked pavement, legs folded under him, his breath now steady, his sides no longer heaving. He was alive. And beside him, as constant as his own shadow, was Stixham. Sadie's fur was still damp, her body weary, but her spirit never faltered. She had barely moved in hours, her flank pressed against Ember's, her eyes tracking every person who stepped too close. Not aggressively, just watching, guarding. She had become a living barrier between the wild and the world. Ruth Carmichael sat nearby on an overturned cooler, her soaked boots propped up against the edge of a concrete barrier. In her lap was a thermos of black coffee, untouched. Lines had deepened around her eyes since the day before, and her hands trembled ever so slightly. "That dog's chosen her mission," she muttered. "And that horse has chosen her back." Next to her, Dr. Elena Vasquez knelt again to inspect Ember's wounds. The gash on his foreleg had slowed bleeding, but still needed attention. "It's a miracle he swam with that injury," she said. "No tendon damage, thankfully. I've seen worse," Ruth said softly, eyes still on Sadie. "But I've never seen this." Behind them, relief workers unloaded more hay-bottled water and emergency medical kits. Volunteers in bright vests moved between tents and supply bins. The bridge had become a kind of floating village, a place where species mingled under shared trauma. Ember lifted his head for the first time since collapse. Sadie responded instantly, rising and pressing her nose gently to his muzzle. Ruth smiled without realizing it. A new vehicle pulled up on the dry portion of the bridge, a government SUV marked with the Kentucky Division of Wildlife logo. Two rangers stepped out. One was Connor Rains, mid-30s, lean with a dark goatee and mirrored sunglasses. He moved with the precision of someone used to authority, but not unkindness. The other was Tanya Sloan, early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with hair in a low braid and a notebook always tucked in her vest pocket. Her expression was thoughtful, eyes scanning the horse-dog duo with cautious curiosity. "Is this the Mustang?" Connor asked, stepping forward. Dr. Vasquez nodded. "Name's Ember. Rescued last night with help from that dog." "Sadie," Connor whistled low. "He's a good-looking animal, probably BLM stock. Should be moved to the holding facility in Lexington. Standard protocol." Sadie stiffened. Ruth rose to her feet. "He's not going anywhere." Connor blinked. "Ma'am, I understand this is emotional, but wild horses are managed for their own safety, especially after trauma. We can give him space vet care. He has space." Ruth interrupted, her voice firm but calm. "I've got 300 acres just past Pine Hollow. It backs up to where his herd likely came from. Fencing's down from the storm. No barn, no paddocks, just land." Tanya stepped forward, studying Ruth more closely. "You're suggesting we release him back into semi-wild conditions, even after injury?" "He won't survive captivity," Ruth replied. "He's already chosen his herd. You'd be tearing him from the only soul who kept him alive." Sadie stood between Ember and the rangers, silent eyes locked on Connor. Not growling, not moving, just being. It was enough to pause the moment. Micah walked over from the supply tent, still mud-streaked, with a sandwich in one hand. "You guys seen the video yet?" "What video?" Tanya asked. Micah held up his phone and played a 45-second clip, Ember leaping into the flood, Sadie swimming beside him, the two of them reaching land under Ruth's coaxing voice. Then Sadie curling around Ember on the pavement the moment that had silenced the crowd. "It's everywhere," Micah said. 500,000 views since this morning. People are calling Sadie the flood angel. Connor removed his sunglasses. "That's a hell of a thing." Tanya watched the screen in silence. "You think people would come after us if we separate them?" "They'd come after me," Micah muttered. "And I'm just the sandwich guy." The tension shifted. Ruth saw it. "I'm not saying let him run free. I'm saying give him freedom with eyes on him. You can send a drone once a week, do periodic vet checks, but let him stay with her. She's doing more for his recovery than any medicine." Jim Beckett approached, still limping, his ball cap tucked low. "Sadie lost her partner in a wildfire last year. He was a mounted police horse. Big old black gelding named Valor. Saved 3 kids in a barn before it collapsed. Sadie never stopped looking for him. Everyone turned. She sees Ember and thinks she's been given another chance." Jim said, voice tight. "Don't take that away from her." Connor looked at Tanya. Tanya looked at Sadie. Then Ember. Finally, Tanya nodded. "Temporary trial. We monitor everything. No public access. If the horse shows signs of aggression or deteriorating health, we reassess." Connor sighed. "Fine by me. But the paperwork's yours." Ruth smiled faintly. "I'll take that trade." As the Rangers retreated to their SUV, Dr. Vasquez pulled out a small bandage kit. "Mind if I patch that leg before he goes?" she asked Ember quietly. Sadie stepped aside. Ember did not. Later that afternoon, under the slanting sun and distant sound of helicopters, Ember walked with slow steps onto Ruth's old trailer ramp. Sadie followed at his side. She didn't need a leash. Her job was clear. As the truck rolled toward Pine Hollow, past broken fences and waterlogged roads, the world began to look less like a battlefield and more like the beginning of something sacred. The land beyond Pine Hollow was nothing short of wild memory rolling hills, laced with wild clover and soft bunchgrass, narrow canyons that whispered secrets in the wind, and springs so clear they mirrored the sky. For Ember, it was both new and ancient, a landscape that called to something older than instinct. He was no longer alone. The 300-acre stretch was technically Ruth's land, but it wasn't fenced or groomed. The storm had torn down every barrier, and she hadn't the heart to rebuild. What remained was open space, untamed, unpredictable, sacred. Ember roamed it now, not as a fugitive, but as something else entirely. Not quite a captive, not quite wild. Something in between. Sadie was never far. Each morning, just before the sky cracked into color, she would appear from wherever she had slept, beneath a ledge inside a hollowed cottonwood, or curled under the stars. She would approach Ember first, nose to his flank ears, tilted forward in assessment. Then she'd move to the others, Maple, a quiet chestnut mare with wide, cautious eyes, and Bria, a younger, black-coated filly, still skittish and healing from a deep cut across her side. Both had been rescued days after Ember found wandering alone along the water's edge, half mad with thirst. Maple followed Ember with a silent steadiness, while Bria clung more to Sadie, often walking close enough to brush against her fur. The little herd had formed without ceremony, but with something stronger than routine survival turned into belonging. Sadie knew this terrain well. Long before the flood, she had run it with Valor, the black gelding she once called family. Now she passed that knowledge to the others. She led them to a spring tucked between slabs of red rock, its flow gentle, its water sweet. She guided them to a canyon wall where shade lingered long into afternoon. And each evening she would stop on a ridge Red Gorge's western rise, where the sunset cast the land in gold, and she would sit her back straight, her gaze wide, as if counting blessings only she could name. Ember often joined her. The first time was instinct, the second choice. By the third, it had become their ritual. He would stand beside her tall and still, his chest expanding with the weight of breath and gratitude. Their silence was never empty. It was understanding. One morning, as fog lifted off the hills like steam from a wound, Ember's ears twitched at a sound in the distance. A soft whinny, high and unsure. He answered without thinking, his voice rolling like a distant drum. The reply was closer. Then another. Sadie stood up and barked once, sharp and low. She had heard it too. They moved together toward the sound. Over the next hill, beneath a twisted sycamore, they found them 3 wild mustangs, mud-caked ribs, showing eyes hollow. One was an old roan stallion with scars that told of many winters. The others, 2 mares, one pregnant, stood behind him, wary and still. Ember didn't approach. He simply stood, muscles relaxed, head low. Sadie walked forward alone. She didn't bark, didn't command. She paused near the old stallion and let him smell her fur. Whatever he found there, storm water, resilience, peace, he seemed to accept. He lowered his head. The others followed. From that day forward, the new horses remained. They drank from the same spring, grazed from the same fields. Ember had become more than a survivor. He had become a leader, not through force but through presence. And because he had something no other stallion did, a guardian with 4 legs, a steel will and a heart stitched together from every creature she'd ever saved. Jim Beckett visited weekly, his truck coughing dust on the road's edge. He never brought a leash. Sadie met him at the gate, tail wagging, then turned back to the herd. Jim would smile. "You're not mine anymore, are you?" he'd say. "You've got a new job now." Ruth stopped by often sometimes with Dr. Vasquez, who'd taken a special interest in monitoring the herd. Vasquez noted Ember's healing gait, Bria's growing confidence, and Maple's protective stance beside the pregnant mare. She even brought a portable ultrasound once, just to be sure. The foal was healthy. "Let them be," Ruth said gently as Vasquez packed her gear. "They've earned this." Back at the ridge where the red gorge cut against the sky, Ember stood alone, one dusk ears perked toward the wind. Coyotes howled in the distance. Sadie appeared beside him, and for the first time she didn't sit. She leaned. Her shoulder brushed his leg, and her sigh was soft. He moved his neck low, resting his heavy head near hers. Their breath rose together in visible clouds. Behind them, the small band gathered for the night, Bria close to Maple, the old roan resting by the spring. Life, despite its scars, had found rhythm again. They stayed that way until the sun gave up its fire and slipped behind the hills. Sometimes the ones who save us don't look like heroes. They come with muddy paws, broken hooves, and eyes that have seen too much. But what they carry is stronger than fear. It's loyalty, silent understanding, and the courage to stand beside you when the world falls apart. Ember and Sadie didn't just survive a flood, they built a bond that crossed every boundary: wild and tame, horse and dog, loss and healing. And maybe that's the real miracle, that even after the storms we can find each other. That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt. That family isn't always the one we're born with. It's the one that finds us when we need it most. In our own lives, we all face floods, losses, silence, isolation. But just like Ember, we are never as alone as we think. Help may come from unexpected places. Sometimes it walks on 4 legs and refuses to leave our side. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, we read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that remind us what love, loyalty, and second chances really look like.